Just a quick reminder of the running order. We have got a bit of a presentation, verbal presentation from Ben and Sean, an overview of the sort of 2021-2022 financial year. We need to vote off the minutes from last year. We've got a guest speaker from the Crown Prosecution Service. We've got the rest of the votes and the presentation on self-driving cars as well. So let's start off with Ben and Sean. I'll hand over to you guys.
Thank you. I just need to do my bit here and say that it's been a challenging year. I've got some notes written here to give me some guidance of what I was going to say, but and I'm just reading it on my computer. It's been a challenging year with a wholesale change to our way of working with our Norfolk County Council especially, but and we had to do a lot of restructuring, and Ben will talk about that. But we were successful, and also we also got a new contract with another alert. Another organisation called Henry Smith for a 3-year project towards our advocacy. Hello, Joy.
Hello. I'm so sorry to be late. I have been trying for 3 months to get some information about a COVID vaccination, and of course they phoned me at 12:20 today.
Oh.
Oh, no worries, Joy.
Okay.
I'm just going to mute you, Joy, so that Sean
Certainly.
can carry on with his presentation. Thank you.
May I ask what the presentation is about?
Yeah, it's his overview of the 2021-2022 financial year.
Thank you.
Okay. And just remind myself. The COVID situation is still an ongoing headache for all of us. We don't do too much face-to-face, maybe a little bit here and there. And this meeting today is a prime example where we're still having to be a little bit wary of meeting up in a big group. One of these months, years, we may able to get back to our old way of meeting up face to face and have a good old natter. I miss those occasions, and it's a great way of networking and meeting people. But we just have to work with what we've got, and we're doing very well. Next bit, I'll just quickly mention that our move to our Norwich Central office turned out to be a little bit fraught with some teething problems with the building and the landlord. So we're going to have to move offices again, and we must support our staff so that they can have a reliable working environment. It's very important for us to have our staff comfortable and working well. Our top mobility service has been struggling to get off because of COVID. So we decided to change the funding structure to a donation only, rather than actually asking for a rental fee. We just request a donation, and it's looking much better. And I would like to also mention that we have got a match pound for pound Aviva fundraising project going on at the moment. And when I looked this morning at 11 o'clock, we very nearly reached £1,000 already. And we got a couple of more weeks left for anybody to go to the Aviva and donate whatever you feel like. So that's really, really great news. And then I just wanted to finish off by saying thank you for various people. I know we got a little bit more about this later on in our AGM, but I just want to personally thank everybody, staff and trustees, for all their time, especially Duncan. So thank you very much, and that's me done for the moment. It's Ben now.
Thank you, Sean. Oh, I wasn't sure if you were still here, Ben, because you're very much frozen on.
I noticed that I'm giving an absolutely hideous grin. So I'm going to start by just turning my camera off and turning it back on in the hope that I look slightly less sinister. Has that made it start working again?
Yes.
Good, thank goodness, because I don't think I could let you all look at me.
Doesn't make any difference for me, you know.
Well,
Yeah.
I think you were saved the view of my horrible Joker-like grin that it got caught on. So, yeah. So yeah, sorry, apologies for that, everybody.
Was that
okay.
Heath Ledger grin?
Pardon?
Was it the Heath Ledger or the Jared Leto grin?
That I don't know. I don't know. Okay, so yeah, so I'm going to talk about our last financial year, which is always a weird thing to talk about in December.
Yeah.
But for some reason, that's how these things work. So 21-22, our financial years start in April and end just before April. So we spent last year was kind of our final, fingers crossed, kind of COVID lockdown year. As you can imagine, that had a huge impact on us still. So we were still mostly throughout the year remote working with some services that were offered face-to-face through the whole of COVID. We started going back to face-to-face at the beginning of this year, so 2022. That is good. It means we can offer a much more accessible service for people, but it presents some challenges with budgeting for travel and things like that when you've not needed to do it for 2 years. What it has meant is it's meant our services, I think, now are much more accessible to people. That one, if someone needs something face to face, we can do it face to face. If someone wants it online, we can do it online. And that works much better than probably before COVID, when we didn't really do things online as much as maybe we could have done. But the world has changed, and that's allowed us to operate different type of services. Our services had great impact last year, so we continue to offer deprivation of liberty safeguards, or DOLS, where we go into residential care homes and support people to have minimal restrictions placed on them for their safety. We supported 170 people last year with that. We also supported 50 people with their NHS complaints. So when somebody is struggling to make a complaint themselves, we can support them with that, and that's really important work. We've been doing that for a few years, and that is one of the areas where the individual maybe doesn't have as much capacity as other pieces of work we do, and we feel that being a disabled people's organisation really gives us a unique selling point in that area where we can support people more appropriately. Our social prescribing team, again, supported lots of people, resulting actually in them being nominated for award at the end of the year, which they've just just attended a ceremony, or Susie, I think, who might be here, attended a ceremony, and just some really, really fantastic work. They do a huge amount of support for individuals who come through to them from GP surgeries. They're helping people with benefits to access appropriate services, all sorts of things, you name it, and they do it. It's been an absolutely great year for them, but also incredibly challenging given that COVID was still going on to do that work. Our community advocacy service has continued to go on. So we've been doing reporting this week. So this figure sounds like a really low figure compared to what we've done this year, but it wasn't. It's just the way we've recorded it slightly differently. But we supported 710 advocacy interventions in our community advocacy services. Over 60% of those were about social care in one way or another. And that's an area that we have seen growth across all of our services across the last few years, and does seem to be something that continues to grow. Our Suffolk Independent Living Service, surprisingly, so we support people to access direct payments in Norfolk and Suffolk. That service actually grew and continued to grow all the way through COVID. It grew 4.5% last year, which is very impressive considering what was going on in the world. I think the 4.5%, a lot of that might have come since January, and anyone in the service, I know they've been super busy since sort of the end of lockdowns, and social care is kind of cranking back up and cranking into gear. We're seeing huge increase in work in those areas. Membership continued to grow. I think we've had 3 years year-on-year growth in that area, so that's really good. Well done to our membership team. Lots of feedback saying that was valuable support, and I'll come back to our membership in a little while. We slightly more sort of negative things that happened last year. So we offered welfare benefits advice, and we offered a Money Matters service, and that was the last year of operation for that service because of some retendering I'll come on to in a minute. And we also, as Sean mentioned, offered a shop mobility service that was very poorly used through lockdown. Really not very many people using that service. A little sort of peek ahead, at the turn of the financial year, almost on the day, we've seen massively increased usage of it, and it's a very widely used service now. But through that period, we really were only renting a few scooters a week, so we probably are doing more business in a day than we were in a week at that period. So one of the huge pieces of work we did do last year, one of the new pieces of work, I should say, rather than huge, is we took on a new project which was hardship advocacy, supplied by some COVID money that came out from the government. It came in midway through last year, and we took it on. We were supporting people in that area to kind of go through their budgets to see if they could spend their money more effectively, saving the money, if there were any savings. We supported 17 people in that period, so we've got one worker doing that, and we got that money halfway through the year, so that was a really good piece of work. And we supported 17 people to actually save money on their budget, so those people are better off for the work we've done. That work's continued as well, so that figure's much higher this year. However, the real challenging piece of work that we did last year, which Sean sort of touched upon, was one of the big contracts we have is called, or was called, the IAA contract. Now, we used to receive funding based on the fact that we supported people with mental health and people with physical disabilities to access advocacy and information and advice. That contract had been threatened to be retendered for a number of years. I think we were on our third rollover 1 year extension to it, and they finally decided no, they needed to do it. That was split into a very different way of tendering. So they moved away from basing it on impairments and decided to base it on the type of support you were receiving. So they split it into 3 activity lines. Lot 1, which was based on information and advice. Lot 2, which was based on advocacy, and lot 3, which was based on something called specialist support. Very, very similar to advocacy. What that meant for us was we led in 2 areas of that retender, and we eventually won the 2 areas, lot 2 and 3, which we led on. So we are now providing we're the lead provider for the advocacy provided by Norfolk County Council, the non-statutory advocacy provided by Norfolk County Council in Norfolk, and also their specialist support services. So we've worked as part of a consortium with Opening Doors, Age UK, MAP. I'm not going to name them all because it'll turn into a boring list of me naming people and I'll forget at least one of them. So I'll move on quickly. And we also went for the lot 1, but not as a lead provider. So we're a smaller provider in lot 1. So we're providing information services. What we've done with that area is we base that. So unfortunately, that was a huge cut in funding. So whereas we've managed to protect our advocacy services, and I'll come on in a minute, but we've actually increased our funding in that area, our advice services, we knew we were going to take a bit of a hit. So our funding last year for advice was probably around about 130,000. This year it's more like 40 to 50,000. So that's a big change in the service, and we knew we couldn't offer such a comprehensive advice service. So we are specialising in disability advice. So we do a lot of work around accessibility, a lot of work around discrimination, and those 2 things sort of go hand in hand, quite frankly, in a lot of the work we do. And then we kind of touch on the fringes of benefits and all sorts of other bits. And again, one of the main areas that we are providing that sort of advice and support is social care, because that is just a huge growth area for what we are supporting people with year on year on year on year. The other thing, though, that we eventually won that, so we are doing that this year. So you'll get reports on that changed at the end of the financial year. So we won it in that year, but we didn't do it in that year. What we also were successful in winning, and huge congratulations goes to, or thanks goes to Kimberly's team, Jenny and Annie, who I think, at least Annie, I think I saw earlier, put together a bid to win a grant from Henry Smith Foundation to fund us to do some new work, or extend some work, I should say, with family advocacy. So supporting parents who are disabled, who are going through child protection processes with their children. And that's a fantastic piece of work. It's incredibly intense, and it's incredibly valuable to people. I don't know whether everyone knows on the call, but the figures for disabled parents having their children taken away from them are incredibly high, massively disproportionately high to anyone else in the kind of general population. And the work that team does in terms of keeping children with loving families is absolutely brilliant, and it just shows the not huge levels of support people need to be able to maintain their family situations, but really have to fight to get that support, which is it's a real shame that they have to do it. It's a real shame we have to do that work at all, but it is fantastic work. So well done to the team, but also well done for winning that bid. Okay, moving on to our plans for next year, or this year that we're in. which is a weird thing to say. 2022-23 is a year of consolidation for us, I think. So we've obviously won a lot of new work. We need to get our services to be running nice and smoothly. We've been doing a lot of work to make sure our services are working as they should and working smoothly. Our main area of sort of service improvements this year are obviously bedding in our whole new advice approach, which is based on our membership approach, which sort of Lisa pioneered in Kimberly's team last year and has moved into our advice membership team this year, putting a lot of work into that. We seem to be doing a lot of recruitment, which seems to be something that we're all doing across the sector at the moment. And the other thing we're doing is upgrading our payroll and finance services. So we've done a big upgrade in software, and also in the hopefully next bit in the hardware, moving that into the cloud with that team. And I know lots of training's gone on and what have you. So they're two areas of kind of service improvement. The biggest change, again, as Sean touched on, is we are looking to move office. So in lockdown, we were looking to move our offices permanently. And we were doing that just before COVID happened. And then this big thing called COVID came along and made all of that incredibly difficult. So we'd found an office that we were really happy with. It was perfect. We thought, oh, that's great, we can go here. And then we started getting sort of sounds from builders that actually you couldn't get materials and they wouldn't be able to do the work before we needed to move out of our existing office. And luckily we hadn't signed on the dotted line of any paperwork at that point, so we had to pull out of that deal and stay where we were for the first year of COVID. The second year of COVID, we were able to move to Sackville Place, where we currently are. But to gloss over a lot of the issues we've had at Sackville Place, we have lots of power cuts, and we need to move to somewhere more accessible and more appropriate. So that is likely to happen in the next 2 months. So we've got paperwork at the moment with solicitors, and hopefully I'll be able to invite some of you to come and have a look at the office once we've signed on the dotted line there, and we have an office. It's much more accessible than our current office. It's much more nice, I suppose, just to kind of be blunt about it. It's a lot nicer, and we will have a lease rather than a short-term agreement to be there. So we're really looking forward to that. I'm really excited about it. I know Hetta was on the call and Hetta has been there as well. I think Hetta was very excited about it. So we will be moving in the near future. Fingers crossed on that one. There is a few thanks that I would like to make before I shut up, and you will all have a chance to ask me questions, I think. So the first one is thank you to all our staff who've all done an absolutely fantastic job last year and this year. It was a very challenging couple of years to work in, to be perfectly honest. Everyone working from home, a lot of people not seeing friends, family. I think probably certainly, you know, I had this experience, but sometimes you would only see your colleagues for a particular day. People weren't going out, and that can be incredibly stressful if you're supporting people who are going through really hard times as well. So thank you to all of our staff, because they all did an absolutely fantastic job. Thank you to our trustees as well, who have all done a great job in supporting us through that period. Also subsequently, and some of you before. And then a special thank you to Jen, who's one of our trustees who left in the summer to pursue pastures new. Duncan, who is leaving today. And also it's probably, well, we should certainly mention Judith Margolis, who passed away last year as well, who's one of our trustees. But thank you all for the amount of work you've put in, because we wouldn't be able to function or do the work or have the impact we do without you. We support over the course of a year about 3,000 people, so it is a huge impact we make, and that is disabled people. That ignores the fact that we also support carers, PAs, and professionals as well in their roles. So a huge thank you to everybody who's impacted on that. And that is it for me. So I'll pass back to our compere, Kimberly Myhill.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, so we do need to sign off the minutes from last year's AGM. I don't know if there's anyone here who wants to vote on those. If you've received everything prior, we have managed to get them signed off before now because of our online voting form has received enough votes to do that. But if there is somebody if there are people in the call who would like to vote, then you feel free to raise your hand with the hand function, use the chat function. Just let us know whether you want to sign them off. It obviously does kind of rely on you being here last time, so if you're a newer member or something, you won't be able to do that. So I'll just give that a minute. I think, Dave, are you wanting to say something?
No, sorry.
No, that's okay. All right, well, I'll leave that to go along in the chat in the meantime. And then we're going to hand over now to Fraser for our financial review.
Hello, everyone. So as has already been said, it's been quite a challenging year because of COVID, and as has been well publicised across the country, it's been a challenging year financially for all of the charity sector, and we have not been immune to that. So our total income over the year has been £1,082,862, with expenditure of £1,104,997. That works out at a total loss of £21,000. But given the fact that we've had all the issues with COVID, issues with buildings and other expenditure over the year, that's actually quite a positive outcome, all things considered. Our reserves at April 2021 were £547,351, and at March 22 are £278,053. And that concludes my bit. Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, we've got Nick Bendy here on the call, who is from the Crown Prosecution Service. And Nick's going to give us a little bit of an overview of the hate crime, the work that the Crown Prosecution Service does. So Nick, I'll hand over to you if you're ready.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. Hello, everybody. My name's Nick. I work for the Crown Prosecution Service here in the east of England. I've come here with my one of my colleagues, Stephen Sparks, who's a district Crown prosecutor and our hate crime lead. So actually, having introduced myself, I'm going to simply hand over to Stephen, who's going to talk to you all about hate crime. And if you've got any questions, or if anything we say is of interest to you and you want to hear further from us, please get in touch with me afterwards. I'd be delighted to hear from you all. Thank you. It's over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, thank you for inviting us to attend this meeting. It's really great to be here to engage with you and to speak to you all today. So I am Stephen Sparks. I'm a prosecutor called a Crown Prosecutor at the Crown Prosecution Service. And our function at the Crown Prosecution Service is to consider prosecutions that are going to come forward, criminal prosecutions within the area that we cover. So we cover the east of England, which includes 4 counties: Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex and Cambridgeshire. So you may think, how do cases come to us? So when a criminal offence is reported or is witnessed by a police officer or reported by a member of the public, maybe a victim, maybe a witness, that's investigated by the police. Now, if the case, the offence that they're looking at is suspected to be a hate crime, then the rules say, the law says that only the Crown Prosecution Service can make a decision on a hate crime as to whether it should be prosecuted. So the police are unable to make that decision. They can make decisions in other cases, but if it's suspected to be a hate crime, it must be a Crown prosecutor that decides whether the case should proceed to a criminal prosecution. So what will happen is, on a hate crime investigation, the police will investigate the case and will then send the material to the Crown Prosecution Service, and a Crown prosecutor will look at the material. So this could include the victim's statement, it could include CCTV, it could include body-worn video, which are the cameras the police officers often hold on their chest. It could include photos of injuries. Many different items of evidence could be gathered and provided to the Crown prosecutor. Now, you may think, well, what is a hate crime? How do they identify whether it's a hate crime? So to identify whether it's a hate crime, we have what's called the perception test. And that's if someone involved in the case perceives it to be a hate crime, then it will be flagged as a hate crime. So ordinarily, it could be the victim perceives it as a hate crime, or it could be the officer investigating it, or it could be the Crown prosecutor that perceives it as a hate crime. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the perception is that the victim thinks, well, I'm the victim of an offence, and it's because the suspect has targeted me or dislikes me or has shown offence towards me because of a specific reason, the membership of 5 protected different groups. So that could be race, religion, sexual orientation, transgender identity, or disability. So if someone who identifies as belonging to one of those protected characteristics perceives themselves to be a victim because of their belonging to one of those groups, then that case would be flagged as a hate crime. Now, it's not actually important as to whether the person technically belongs to one of those groups. What's important is that we can prove the suspect suspects, believes or targets them because they think they belong to one of those groups. So actually, if the victim says, well, I don't actually belong to one of those groups, but it's clear that the suspect thought I did and showed hostility towards one of those groups, then that can be considered a hate crime as well. So it can get a bit technical. Now, the actual criminal test is the hostility test to determine whether it's a hate crime, which means that when the offence is committed, around that time, the suspect demonstrates hostility or is motivated by hostility towards the victim based on their actual or presumed membership to one of those 5 groups that I've just mentioned. So that's the legal test. And it can be complex. I've tried to explain it as best as I can. But basically, it's one of those 5 protected groups, and it's a criminal offence that happens towards someone because they do or are believed to belong to one of those groups. So what we often see, for example, unfortunately, is you may have some unpleasant words said to someone because they belong to one of those groups or are believed to belong to one of those groups. So it could be verbal abuse, and that would be a criminal offence. Or it could be an assault, and during the assault, words are used that are clearly derogatory or nasty towards one of those 5 protected groups. So there are various different ways. It could be a theft. It could be a theft, and at the time of the theft, words are said or messages or slogans are used. It could be messages that occur online, posted online, or are sent online, or a letter that's sent, and it could have unpleasant words related to to one of those 5 groups. So what we do as the Crown Prosecution Service is we'll look at all the evidence that's been given to us, and we will decide if there's a realistic prospect of conviction. Are the court more likely than not to convict someone if they look at the evidence that we're looking at? And if we think they do, then we will say to the police, yes, the test is met, you can go ahead and charge the suspect with this hate crime. And what we do is, in hate crimes, because it's acknowledged how serious they are and the impact that it has not just on victims but their families and the communities, we give victims of hate crimes an enhanced service, which means we contact them regularly to keep them updated with the case. We answer their questions, and we let them know of any changes in the case or any outcome of the hearings in the case. They'll be updated and they'll be offered special measures if they have to attend court. Now, in most cases, thankfully, the defendant pleads guilty. So in 86% of hate crime prosecutions, there is a conviction. And in most of those cases, actually, there is a guilty plea. Only a small amount go to trial. If they go to trial, then it may well be we ask the victim if they can give evidence for us. And it might be that they need some special measures put in place or some adjustments. And we can sort those out. We will discuss those. The police will discuss them with the victim. We'll look at the needs of each individual, and we can make various applications to support the process of giving evidence at court. And just to give you an idea of volume, last year we prosecuted 10,000 hate crimes across England and Wales. Now, those special measures, they can include giving evidence from a different building. It could be from home in the exceptional cases. It could be with screens in the courtroom. Many different ways that you can be supported giving evidence. The other thing I would say is that because hate crimes are really serious, when the person's convicted, we ask for what's called a hate crime sentence uplift. And that's because the law says that if someone's convicted of a hate crime, in most cases, the court should impose an uplift in the sentence because it's a hate crime. And we will ask that happens as the prosecutor during the sentencing hearing. So, for example, the court may say, when they're sentencing an individual, we are sentencing you to 6 months in prison, but because it's a hate crime, we're increasing it to 9 months or 12 months. Or it could be a community order and they increase the order, or it could be a fine and they increase the fine. Just to give you an example, that they'll announce what the sentence would have been if it wasn't a hate crime, and then they'll announce the uplift. And that's so it's clear to everyone that the court has factored in the seriousness of the hate crime aspect and has taken that forward and made it clear, we take this really seriously. This is the extra sentence you're getting called the hate crime uplift. And just to give you an example, 79% of hate crime cases last year received a sentence uplift. You don't get them in every hate crime case because there's some technical legal points as to why you won't get them in every case, but most cases you'd get them. And in 79% of cases, the suspect, the defendant, when they were sentenced, got an uplift in their sentence to reflect that. Other things that we can do when a defendant is sentenced for a hate crime is we can ask for a protective order called a restraining order to protect the victim if it's deemed necessary and proportionate in that case. It may well be that you've had a victim of a hate crime, a repeat victim, or they live near to the offender. There's reason to believe the offender may harass them again. We can ask for a restraining order to prevent that defendant contacting that victim for a certain period of time, or even indefinitely with certain conditions. It might exclude them from going to a specific area, for example. Now, I've mentioned the support that's available if someone reports a hate crime. How do you report a hate crime? Well, if you see a hate crime or you're a victim of a hate crime, there are many different ways to report a hate crime. If it's an emergency, of course, you can dial 999. You can dial 101 if it's not an emergency and ask to speak to a police officer. You can report hate crimes online, but there are specific hate crime reporting centres that are available throughout the country. There are various different ones, and you can find them online. Often the local police force on their website will have a list of local reporting centres, and many charities assist by way of referring reports to assist in that regard. And as I say, at the end of the case, you will be notified of will be supported throughout, and you'll be told what the ultimate outcome was it a conviction, and what the sentence was at the end. So really, that's an outline of what we do. I should have just said that if when we get the case from the police, we decide it doesn't quite meet the test, we can ask the police to go and carry out some more work if we feel that a bit more investigation work might get us to where we need to be on that specific case. And then the police will go off and look at what we've suggested, do some further work to see if we can get that further evidence to then bring the case forward. So that's really a summary of the work that we do. Every single prosecutor that works on hate crime has specific training on hate crime, so they know the law and they know how to apply the law. And my role is I'm the hate crime coordinator for the East of England. So all our hate crime prosecutions, I'm the ultimate coordinator. I work with our individual prosecutors that work on those cases, but I also work hard with the police. And we're always constantly trying to improve how we deal with hate crimes. And that includes the quality of the prosecutions, the service to victims and witnesses, and also the volumes that we're prosecuting relative to the volumes of reported hate crimes. And so just to give you an example, every quarter we hold what's called a scrutiny panel, where we invite members of the public, members of the police forces, our prosecutors, to come together in a meeting where we scrutinise concluded hate crime cases, and we give access to our case files to everyone that attends. So it's really open and transparent, and everyone can see how we've prosecuted that case, how we've come to the decision, and what the outcome was. And it's a way for everyone to get together and make suggestions, make comments on the case, look for positive work that we're doing, and also to identify future learning, because we do accept we don't always get it every case 100% perfectly. And that's the idea of the scrutiny panels, is it's open, transparent scrutiny from anyone that wishes to join the panel to come and look at those cases. And the last panel that we did, we looked at disability hate crime cases, prosecutions that we took forward to the court. And that was for the purpose of seeing, well, actually, in those specific cases, how did we treat the victim? How did we progress the case? What was the outcome? Did we get the sentence uplift? Did we communicate with the victims appropriately? And I've said that we have the 5 different protected memberships. One of them is disability, of course. And what we do is we try and ensure that there's equal focus on each of those 5. So we will rotate in our groups and look at different cases from the different protected characteristics. So really, that's my my chat on what we do on hate crime, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And Nick and I are happy to, if there's any questions about my presentation, I'm sure Nick and I will try and answer them. I didn't know if Nick had anything specific to add as well.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I was just going to add that, I mean, as Stephen said, we prosecuted 10,000 hate crimes last year, and disability offences motivated by someone's hatred towards someone because they are disabled is a hate crime. But we know that that is just the tip of the iceberg. We know that there are an awful lot of crimes against disabled people that just go unreported, and there are many, many different reasons for that. It could be fear or misunderstanding of what the court process is, which is why we're really delighted to be here today, so that we can, you know, give you some more information about the court process and put some faces to the CPS that you may have heard about. These people making decisions on cases, but who are they? We're not just faceless people. We are actually, you know, reasonably nice local people who you know, really want to get convictions against people who commit these terrible offences. So there's all sorts of reasons why people don't report them. Sometimes it could be they don't even understand what has happened to them is a crime. There are all kinds of reasons, and we're here today, telling you what we do. But I'd also really like to hear from you, and from your communities about the reasons people, don't report things. So please do get in touch with me if you want us to come out and speak at other events, or you just have some questions for us. Please get in touch with me. I'm more than happy to help. Because it's not just about us going out and telling people what the CPS do. It's more important than that, is us finding out what's going on in your communities, so that we can learn from those experiences, so that we can get better results for victims ultimately, and that we treat our victims well when they do get into the system. We don't get everything right, but we certainly want to work in the right direction to make sure that we improve in future. So please, any questions you've got now, or if you want to contact me afterwards, please do get in touch.
Thank you so much, Nick and Stephen. It is really interesting, because we usually deal with hate crime right at the beginning. So it is interesting to hear the rest of the process. I've pinned Nick's details in the chat for anyone who does want to get in touch, and we'll take any questions now. I think Dave has a question.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Dave.
Very interesting. Thank you for the talk, and it's really nice to hear that that's happening. My concern is what happens when the police don't, either through budget cuts or for whatever reason, don't investigate thoroughly and or don't report it to yourselves. This is not an uncommon phenomenon. We saw it a lot in rape cases, with women reporting and being ignored, and I fear that there's a similar issue happening with people with disabilities reporting things and essentially being fobbed off.
Stephen, do you want to take that?
So, Dave, in the first instance, I appreciate you're suggesting that you've heard comments that or news articles or perhaps in other areas of the media about cases being reported and perhaps not investigated. I can't comment on that. What I can say is that if I really would urge, if anyone is or suspects they're either a victim or have witnessed a hate crime, do report it. We work really hard with our local forces to ensure that we work together on building the cases, getting the cases submitted to us, and applying the test to see whether it's appropriate to lay any charges. Nick and I can't answer questions for the police in this meeting in relation to any concern about them not being investigated properly, because it's not our role to investigate. Nick and I are from a different organisation, which is the CPS. But what I will say is, if someone does report a crime and then they feel it's not investigated properly, the police do have the appropriate channels to make observations and even formal complaints. And there is a separate also organisation to the police where the IOPC, where complaints can be made. I won't go into too much detail because it's not Nick and I, it's not our remit, but I hope that answers that. It's not within our remit to, if a crime is reported and it's not dealt with properly by the police and it never comes to the CPS, that's not something Nick and I unfortunately can ever get involved in. We can only ever get involved in cases that are referred to us. We can work with the police around how we work together on building hate crime cases, but I would urge you to report any hate crime you suspect has happened. And as I say, if you feel it's not dealt with adequately by the police, there are methods to make observations and complaints about that to the force or even other bodies.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Martin has a question next.
Yeah. Hi. Stephen, in your presentation, you mentioned about there are reporting centres that we can report to. where can we find these centres? How can we find out about them? And Ben, is Equal Life still one of them?
What I can do is I can find out the various information, Martin. I think it was Martin you asked the question. Is it Martin?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, what I can do is after this call, I can find out some more information for you on reporting centres. I think you mentioned Equal Lives.
Mm-hmm.
Who we're so I didn't know what the question was related to Equal Lives, but
we did
whether...
used to be one, Martin, but we don't get very many through, so we don't really get the experience in it to handle it very effectively here, I guess. But we did used to be one. We still have a relationship with the hate crime officer at NCC. I don't know if Ben wanted to add anything to that.
Okay, thanks.
I was just going to say, Martin, thank you for Kimberly for dealing with that. I can get back to you, Martin, on the identification of other reporting centres for you. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, I just thought it would be of interest for our members and the wider community to know as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank
no
you.
problem.
Thanks, Martin. Duncan?
Yeah, just a quick one. Generally, a lot of hate sort of crime is generally one person says something to another person. There's no other witnesses and things like that. How many sort of those situations would come to you because it's a he said, she said, sort of in between the two sort of thing? It's very hard, I should imagine, to prosecute someone on sort of like someone has said something and someone has received something, but there's no other witnesses to prove. So it's sort of one person against another.
So what we do, Duncan, is we work with our police to encourage the police to build the case using as much evidence available as possible. It may well seem at the outset that it's one word versus another, but when you actually look into the detail of the case, there may be several other evidential avenues that you can explore. So, for example, you may look at the suspect's previous history. They might have a history of similar offending that indicates that there's bad character to factor in, that this person may have a repeat habit of committing offences, and they might commit similar offences to what we're looking at. So what you're looking at is the credibility of each person, where it's one versus the other. And if you've got someone whose credibility is negatively impacted because they've got a regular history of committing similar offences, and then you've got a victim of good character who there's no reason to suspect they're not telling the truth, then a case like that may well pass the test, which is there a realistic prospect of conviction? But there's often other avenues that you can explore. So, for example, if the victim rings 999 straight away and they're very distressed, those calls are always recorded. So what we do, if it's one word versus another, we'd say to the police, can we have a listen to the 999 call? And then if you listen to it and the victim's clearly distressed, they're giving you a clear, coherent account of what has happened, and that is consistent with the statement they later give, or if they're with a friend who reports it on their behalf, if it's all consistent, then it builds a picture of credibility about that victim to say, actually, it's clear that this victim was distressed. There's no reason to suggest that they're not telling the truth. You do have to factor in what the defendant may say, suspect may say in interview, but there are many other avenues, even though it may appear at the outset one versus another. There are many different areas that you can ask the police to, and they do consider, such as 999 calls. Or if the police, Duncan, if the police attend the scene relatively swiftly, they might have their body-worn camera recording usually, and they might be able to record the emotional distress of the victim. They'll go and speak to the victim, and we'll often get that video, and it's clear the victim's really distressed and giving quite a clear, open and honest account. And so it's not necessarily just one word versus another, because you then have that video and that 999 call, where you can play that to the court so the court can see the actual honesty and distress in the victim, and that really can add weight to a case. So one versus another, we do see those cases, and we do encourage the police to bring them forward to us, strongly encourage them, because often we can build those cases to meet the test for a prosecution.
All right, thanks, brilliant. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Touching on what Stephen said then about Duncan's question, in fact, Dave's question earlier, there's quite a bit of information on our website now about the work we're doing with police, in terms of offering to give them early advice and helping build cases with them at an early stage to try and increase the number of cases that we see coming through to prosecution. So please have a look through our website if anyone's got wants any further information. We've got all of our policy statements are on there about what we do to prosecute hate crimes and all other types of offences as well. So there's loads of stuff on there. Yeah, just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you both. So yeah, I'll just remind people that Nick's details are in the chat if you want to get in touch. And yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you both.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for
everyone.
inviting
Thanks,
us.
Kimberly.
Okay, I think it is time for the voting. So I think I counted up that we just have 2 people who could vote in the chat. I think everybody else has voted ahead of time, which has meant that I believe everything has been voted through. But if there are people on the call who would like to vote, we'll go ahead and do that now. So the minutes have already been completed. So the next thing to vote on is for Sean as chair for an additional year, which I think has been voted in favour of on our online voting form. If you want to vote on the call now, you can either use the raise your hand physically so we can see you, raise your hand on Teams using the Teams chat function, use the chat, or just verbally say that you are for, against, or that you're abstaining. Dave Schrager has also been voted through as a trustee, so he wasn't at the beginning of the call, but he is now. So congratulations, Dave, and welcome. Another
Thank you very much.
Another one for us is voting for the minimum number of required votes for quorum to change from 25 to 10. This one's a really important one for us because we used to have lots of member groups, and those member groups had members of their own, and it was much easier for us to get to the required number of votes. But because there are less groups around now, and people are less likely to come along and vote online compared to when we had a face-to-face AGM, it is more difficult for us to reach that number. So changing the minimum is really helpful, and that has also been voted through. And voting for the trustees to be able to elect a chair instead of the members, that gives us a better idea, or gives the trustees, they know who they're working with more than our members do. So that helps us to make sure we've got a really good, strong position as chair. And the last one is to vote our audited 2022 accounts, which have also been signed off. So unless there is anything from Ben or any of the trustees want to add, we've got everything we need for the voting portion, I believe.
Yeah, no, nothing to add from me. Sorry.
Well, thanks for that.
Slowly got that out.
No worries. Okay, I'll move on then. So the next thing is just to say thank you for your votes. There are lots of people who voted ahead of time using our online form, which obviously, as you can tell, saves us time in this meeting, but it gives you a chance to actually look through everything that you're voting on properly, read all of the corresponding paperwork and all of that stuff. And thank you so much for those who have taken the time to read through that and vote, or have voted over the phone, or however you've done it. Thank you. It really does help us to carry on with the work that we're doing. So I have a presentation now, so just bear with me while I swap screens to my other presentation. So I'll just do that quickly.
Awkward silence.
Yeah. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay, so I think what you should be able to see now is a slide of which is a blue screen with a little car on it. Can everybody see that okay? So while I'm doing this one, I won't be able to see you. So ooh, going ahead of myself. So if you have questions or anything, then you can pop them in the chat and I will see them when I have finished. So Sean, for your benefit, there is a blue screen. It says the future of self-driving cars. There is a little electric car with the Wi-Fi symbol, somebody sitting in there, and then there's a road sign on the side that says self-driving cars, the impact on disabled people. So this actually came up because Sean expressed an interest in learning more about this topic. So I did a little bit of research to put this together. And so this presentation is what I've learned through that research. But it's a lot more of an in-depth topic than I had realised when I started looking into it. So I met with some private sector experts who could clue me in as to where we're at with this at the moment and what it could look like in the future. So credit for that goes to Richard Threffel at KMPG and David Duval, who is a freelancer. And I can put you in touch with both of those if you wanted to find out more about this. They were both really helpful, and they both spoke to me over Teams and shared lots of their work with me. And I have to say, it was refreshing to hear private sector professionals talk about disability in this way, because I quite often just doesn't happen, and their sort of eagerness to include accessibility in this work, it was just really good to hear. So that was good. So for this screen, we've got what is a self-driving car. So a self-driving car, also known as an autonomous car, driverless car, robotic car, is a car incorporating vehicular automation. And so that is a ground vehicle that is capable of sensing its environment and moving safely with little or no human input. So what that basically means is that you could essentially sit inside the vehicle, input some information into a system that might be similar to how you currently use a sat nav, and the vehicle will do everything else. So one of the things that comes up the most when people think about self-driving cars is whether or not they are safe. So this screen, Sean, is a green screen with the words "Are they safe?" and there's yes and no options, and I'll go through those now. So I think we tend to find this is a new concept, and so lots of time new things are scary. But there is quite a lot of tech out there already in the mainstream that we don't necessarily think about being the same kind of tech. So some planes are almost completely automated. This type of tech is already used in mines, in airports, and there are some cars on the road right now that have this technology as well. So I think people do get concerned about accidents and things that have been reported, but they kind of reminded me when I was talking to them that actually almost all of the accidents that happen right now are caused by a human error. It's 95% of road traffic accidents caused by human error right now, and removing the human reaction time can actually make the roads a lot safer. But when thinking about whether or not it is safe, both Richard and David did remind me that, you know, currently they're not quite there. That's why they're not in the mainstream right now, because the tech does need refining. So even though they think that they can be safe, there is still work to do right now. And the other reason that they felt it is kind of seen that way, that they might be unsafe, is media portrayal, and that they were sort of quite keen, media were quite keen originally, but have kind of turned following a couple of accidents that have happened. But they don't always point out the positives that self-driving cars could bring, particularly disabled people.
I'm assuming you mean mines in the ground and not explosive mines.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. I just,
well, do you know what? I actually didn't check, but yeah, I think I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Thanks.
So what are some of the positives, and how can these types of vehicles benefit disabled people? So the main reason that they would benefit our community is freedom of design. Essentially, if you think about a car now, it has the steering wheel, the seating, the gear stick, and everything is designed with a driver in mind. But without the need for a driver, you could pretty much have an empty box, and you wouldn't even necessarily need windows. So it gives a lot of freedom. So people could bring in wheelchairs really easily, guide dogs really easily. They could bring their PA with them, and the sort of the freedom of design there is probably the most beneficial for disabled people. The added benefit of not driving when you're in the vehicle is also the free time that you would have. So whilst traveling from A to B, you could sleep, you could eat, you can catch up on your work, you can read. There's all sorts of things that you can do while you're in the car, because you're not having to focus on driving. So the best thing for disabled people really with the design is no disability is off limits. So, you know, if you're visually impaired, for example, driving is no longer off limits in that respect, because you don't have to do it yourself. So you can use one of these vehicles, and they are almost completely accessible in that respect. Another positive is affordability and access. One proposed model of ownership is that you wouldn't need to own one at all. The way that you can order an Uber or a taxi right now, I think the model, the vision for self-driving cars is that you can order one to come to you and take you from A to B without needing a driver. And needing to own one yourself. They would be maintained and kept and looked after elsewhere. So it's a good option for affordability and making sure that you don't have to worry about charging it and maintaining it and all of the costs that are usually associated with owning a vehicle. Because I'm assuming that they wouldn't be particularly cheap to buy at first, given the sort of costs of an electric car right now. But it seems like using them on a pay-as-you-go basis may be a beneficial option for a lot of people who already find cars unobtainable because of how expensive they are, and the added expense of adaptions that a lot of disabled car owners need to have just adds to the cost of having a car. And another point on accessibility is that the road markings will have to be much more clear. So the technology heavily relies on road markings, and they need to be very clear for the cars to be able to read the road and be able to drive without human input, because they're reading guidelines that are on the floor essentially. Which it was a little upsetting, to be honest, to hear that how willing they are to make changes to the roads for cars, but not any disabled people who've been asking for this for a long time. But that's just the way of the world, I guess. But it does look like accessibility of road layout and pavement layout is something that is being looked at to make these cars work. So I guess it's still a win for us either way. City centres are likely to be the first to receive this type of tech because it's easy to remove all of the other cars from the area. So one of the reasons that this tech might not work right now is in conjunction with other traffic. It might not work well when there's other types of cars on the road. So if thinking about restricting driving cars into city centres, they could test this tech in a smaller contained area where it's got high control, which I think is a good thing for us because city centres can often be quite inaccessible. And if it means that we could get into the city centre, that would obviously be another bonus for us. Okay. So in terms of the opportunities that it might create for us, job opportunities, being able to travel from A to B using this type of vehicles could open up the doors of a lot of different job opportunities for disabled people. Also, being in the cars that we couldn't before just opens up opportunity in general because of accessibility of the cars. So the time that I mentioned earlier about being inside, not having to use that to commute. They were talking of being able to provide health and medical care in the vehicles. So a bit like the back of an ambulance now, but they're basically thinking about the types of things that you could do on your way to work or wherever you happen to be commuting. And being able to sleep and rest. I feel like commuting is quite hard work sometimes, and especially if you've got a disability on top of a commute and you're already dealing with inaccessible transport. This option could bring you the opportunity for a different type of work and then also give you that commute time back to catch up on your rest. So when thinking about when this might happen, I'm told that UK government legislation is kind of ahead on this. It seems like we're pretty well legislated for it at the moment. And the original projections were for this year and next year, but it's looking now to be 10 to 15 years from now before it will be considered a mainstream reality, which also doesn't feel that long away. So it'd be interesting to see how things change over the next few years. Despite them wanting to test it in city centres, first, larger lorries and larger vehicles are easier to nail the tech on in terms of the actual vehicle because they're often travelling mostly on straight roads. So they feel that the technology will be seen first in lorries and larger vehicles, but in terms of it actually being used and becoming mainstream, smaller cars and cities and towns would be the next to kind of see that rolled out where it would become a bit more mainstream. And right now the tech is slowed down by the rapidly changing environment. So climate change again, essentially weather changes and deterioration of our landscapes and the roads. It's making it hard for the tech to be refined, which is causing delays in moving this project forward. So I guess it's a little bit chicken and egg there, because it probably would help slow climate change down quite a bit, but it's also causing delays to the technology now, because they can't get a good controlled environment to get it tested in. So a lot of this does hinge on getting the climate crisis under control. So yeah, that's it. I have I would be happy to try and answer your questions, but given that I put everything I learned into this presentation, I might not be able to, but as I said, I can point you in the direction of people I spoke to, and there was some good reports that I was sent as well. One of the things was a Motability report, and for those who are familiar with Motability, it seems like they're actually very involved, which I think gives us a good chance of accessibility being kept at the forefront of this project. And like I said, it was really interesting to hear how it's being talked about so much in the private sector, and that gave me a lot of hope. But yeah, so that's that. Are there any questions I might be able to try and answer?
Kimberly, this is Joy. Could I ask you a
Hi,
question?
Joy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hello. This is very exciting, and I think my interest in it is
Yes.
probably the same as Sean's interest in it. And it sounds very positive, and perhaps I'm just expressing some of my disability paranoia. But I watched a program about self-drive cars on BBC4, which is a pretty serious-minded station, a year or so ago, and it was an hour-long program. They never mentioned how this might help or how this might affect visually impaired people. You know, we just didn't exist as far as they were concerned. So I want to ask you, did you get any sense of whether visual impairment is really being taken into consideration, both for us as potential travelers in a self-drive car, and that we really could, even though we can't see the dials or the backup or anything, and also those of us who might be walking down the roads not being able to see all those nice improved lines. Are they really are they aware that disability for this purpose does include visually impaired people, and indeed how important it would be to us to be able to access these vehicles?
Yeah, so I would say that I did get a good sense of it from both the people I spoke to and the interest that Motability were taking in the work. But right up until I asked them how they consulted with disabled people, which it then transpired that they did not. So it seems a little bit, it was talked about a lot without me having to prompt. You know, they accessibility was definitely at the forefront of the conversation I had with both of the people that I spoke to, but when asked about consultation, it was a bit like, oh no, we didn't do that. So yes and no. I do feel like it is something that they're aware of, but I do think that a lot more work will need to be done, and hopefully at the right time, because obviously the last thing we want is for the tech to be implemented and then find out that it's actually inaccessible. But yeah, so that was some.
That it makes things worse for us.
Absolutely, yeah. So I kind of, yeah, it was. I did get a good vibe from both of them that it was something that they understood, and that there were good organisations involved and a lot of money in there as well. But I don't know that their consultation is happening at the right times, or if at all. So. But there was quite a bit of talk about, you know, how it will affect pedestrians and cyclists and that kind of thing. So I think it would be good for us to stay in touch with those guys because of the work that they're doing, and hopefully if there is a chance of taking part in any consultation, we can do that.
That sounds good. Thank you.
No worries.
I
I have a question. Sorry, it's I'm Grace. I
Hi,
just joined
Grace.
as a
hello,
member.
Grace.
And I'm blind as well. and I've been told, I've always sort of accepted that I kind of have a few points really, because I'm blind, and I've just come to accept the fact that I will never drive in the mainstream.
Mm.
In that I've had a driving experience off-roading in a 4x4 that I actually drove myself with an instructor, which was absolutely fantastic. But I've just come to accept that it's something that's something that won't happen. So to see that is very, very touching.
Mm.
But I think there are a few pitfalls in that. Say, for example, you put the information into the system. Does that rely on you knowing your routes, or could you get a sighted person to do that for you? I guess you could.
Yeah, I think there's various ways that it will work. I think they were talking about voice control and kind of similar to what we have now in a lot of vehicles of just telling it where you want to go. But I think, yeah, I don't know too much about what that tech will look like when it's all been refined. But yeah, it did cross my mind that if you could use it, you might not be able to use it completely unaided, but I'm unsure, to be honest. I think a lot of that remains to be seen when we start to see it in the mainstream.
And the other things were, would you need the normal things required to drive? Like if you want to own one yourself, like a driving license, driving lessons, that kind of.
Yeah, I don't think so. So I think it is more of a public transport model than it is owning a car model. But I think I haven't actually seen what some of the legislation looks like. I don't know how far we are in terms of whether you need licenses or tests to use them. But I guess there should be some kind of training on how to use them, and hopefully learning how to override it just in case of an emergency of some sort. But yeah, I'm not sure.
And I think the other thing, again, from the blind perspective, is are they going to be quieter than normal cars? Because if you're walking and you don't hear it coming, you're screwed.
Yes, I think a lot of what he was saying about the layout of roads and paths is that because it does need to be so clear for the car, I got the impression that it would then pedestrian areas and car areas would be a lot more separate than they currently are. And so I don't know whether, but yeah, but it's so hard for me to visualize in my head what that would look like, because you're kind of using what we've got now as a basis, and I can't imagine, Gentleman's Walk with the cobbley roads, for example. I just can't picture what that would look like if it was this world that these guys are talking about. But yeah, it would be interesting to see how they get around kind of keeping
Very
it
much so.
pedestrians and animals and all sorts.
Whereas I wanted to go to do my weekly shopping and go to one of these big supermarkets stores, then the layout would have to be reorganized so I can get to the door to meet up with a staff from the supermarket or able to walk in. So the car would have to get me to somewhere safe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think Edward has a question.
Hello, everybody. Edward from Vision Norfolk here. Just
Hello.
wanted to really come in on a few points that were made here. This is a very interesting discussion. Like with other previous speakers, I too have I've no sight, and driverless cars are a very interesting thing for me. I went to a couple of showrooms about 5 years ago. I was in a shopping centre, would you believe, in the Midlands, and they have a Tesla stand there. And I went and had a look at the cars, and the thing that was concerning was about the noise, as somebody mentioned earlier on. And the first thing to say is that now all hybrid cars, whether they're electric or hybrid, now have to have a different kind of noise. So the cars have to emit a certain amount of decibels to be audible. That doesn't take away the fact that there are current vehicles out there already which you can't go back, you can't recall them and change the sound effects on them. But that is now coming into law. And I think that, if I'm not mistaken, Jaguar were the ones who led the way with the experiment as to noise and what was an acceptable amount of noise to have. I could be wrong there, so don't quote me on that. The second thing I'm led to believe by somebody who is a lawyer, you will have to have some kind of test and some kind of license to show that if you own a vehicle, you can drive one. Again, I don't think anything like that has been designed, or if it has, I certainly know nothing about it. But I just really wanted to come back on a few of those points that have been made, because after my experience and my visit, it was a very useful and interesting thing, and I certainly hope it's something that a lot of us can benefit, not just visually impaired people, of course, but everybody can benefit from in the future, and makes everybody's lives a lot more independent. Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it is really exciting, but I mean, it's one of those things that, you know, if we can't get on top of climate change, as I mentioned, it's just we're not gonna get that far. So I think we have got a long way to go in terms of other types of legislation that need to come in. And even though I'm pleased that the UK is ahead in terms of legislation on this, it does kind of feel like, well, because we're so behind in other areas, they're just not going to gel. So it's like you say, Sean, about the supermarket, you know, it's all well and good having this great legislation, this fantastic vehicle that gets you there, but when you're there, it's not accessible. So it's just, we're not quite matching up right now. So obviously it does feel exciting, but it also it will remain to be seen how it works for lots of disabled people. But yeah, I will leave a couple of links in the chat, which you'll still be able to get to after you've left the meeting, of some of the things that I've read and the people that I spoke to. And I'll also include that in our next newsletter. Sorry, Duncan.
Could I talking of Tesla, Elon Musk and things like that, a very intelligent guy. Basically, most Teslas now are enabled almost to be able to drive with it, because they're constantly updating themselves. By the more miles people do in them, the more miles that they can do. But the problem is as you say, legislation and insurances and things like that of what happens if an accident happens when a driver hasn't got his hands on the wheel, but technically you still have to drive the car. But in a sense, the car is able to drive itself, but there's still, it can now recognize red lights, green lights, and all that sort of stuff. So it is getting there, but I think it's going to be a long while before, like you say, people like insurances and things like that come to a point where, like you say, if you hit someone who's walking across the road and didn't hear you or see you or anything like that, then how's the insurance and things going to fight that out? I think that's going to be one of the biggest stumbling blocks within this situation, is getting all that side of things in law and legislation and moving forward, sort of thing. So it's like I say, it's a great subject. It's very interesting to watch programs on it and see how advanced these cars are now getting. But I think the lawmakers are behind sometimes the actual technology.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so I think it's now time for, if there's any questions for Ben or Sean or any of the trustees, before we wrap up. So I'll leave it open to questions, general questions about Equal Lives, or anything that you've heard today through them talking about our sort of previous year or what we're going to be doing next year. Unless there aren't any, because it doesn't look like there are. It doesn't look like there are. So yeah, So that's it. I can let you guys go. And thank you so much to everybody who came and listened and voted and contributed to anything that we did last year, or to put this meeting together, and for us to continue with the work that we do. Ben, do you want to say anything? Oh, sorry, Duncan.
Yeah, I'd just like to say it's been an honour to have been a trustee of Equal Lives over the last, I can't know how many years I've been doing it now, but I'd just like to say thank you, and I hope that things all go forward very well for Equal Lives. Hopefully it won't be the last time you see me. I might be able to perhaps get involved in sidelines if it needed and things like that, but it's been a great honour, and thank you very much for allowing me to be a trustee, and I hope the company goes forward in a great way. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you, Duncan.
And I would like to also say thank you to you, Kimberly, for organising and doing today's meeting, plus your presentation on a car. But I'm hoping that I will able to jump in one day.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Sean. Thank you for asking, because it was really interesting to go and learn about, to be honest. So yeah, thank you. Okay, so
Kimberly, perhaps you could put that in the next blog.
I could, yeah, I definitely could. Yeah, it'd be good to signpost to a few people to the work that's happening. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, unless there's anything else, I'll hand over to Ben just to wrap up then.
Yeah, time for me to wrap up then. Thank you for everyone coming. Congratulations to Sean for becoming a chair for another year. I'm not sure whether that's something I should congratulate you on, Sean, or commiserate you on.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Congratulations to Dave for officially becoming a trustee.
Excellent, thank you.
And yeah, again, thank you for Duncan, who's been an excellent trustee through a really difficult period in Equal Lives' history with COVID. So thank you very much to him, and thank you very much to the rest of you for coming, and trustees for being trustees, and staff for taking an interest and coming along today, and also all of your sensational work over the course of the year. And thank you to all our members for being our members and supporting us in doing our work. Yeah, I ought to say thank you to Kimberly and her team for putting this together as well, because they've done a fantastic job. And I will give the rest of you your Friday afternoons back. I mean, what would be great is if we did have self-driving cars, we could all jump in them and go to the pub, but unfortunately we can't. So when that technology is there, maybe that'll be something we'll do at the end of one of these. But thank you, everybody, and see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.
See you later, Duncan.